In this section of notes, we're going to focus on the slopes of parallel and perpendicular lines. And the slope of parallel lines, if you kind of look at this first section, have the same slope. Okay, so these equations are written in y equals mx plus b form, and where the m is the slope and the b is the y-intercept. So with parallel lines, we want the slopes because they're going in the same direction and they're never touching. So if you notice here, the number in front of the x again is your slope. This has a 3, this has a 3. They're parallel. They have the same slope. They're never going to touch. It's okay for the y-intercepts, your b, to be different. We want them to be different because if they're not, then you have the same line. They're not parallel. Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. This just means that opposite reciprocal means opposite sign and flipped number or fraction. So the signs are different. One's positive, one's negative. And then they're flipped versions of each other. So the number of fractions flips. If you notice here that we have the slope of negative 1/5. And here we have the slope of 5. One's negative, the other one's positive. And technically, if you write 5 as a fraction, it's 5 over 1. And if you flipped 1 over 5, it becomes 5 over 1. They're opposite signs, and they are flipped versions of each other. So we can use this in our next example. We want to determine, and some things should be arrows. So line AB and CD are parallel, perpendicular, and neither. So we're just going to use this really helpful formula at the top, slope formula. You're going to have to know that on your own. You're not going to be given the slope formula. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And label. And how has AB up here? It doesn't matter. B's first, A's second. Just keep it how it is. So you can say this is x1, y1, x2. Oh, wrong one. One more over. x2, y2. Here's the slope. So y2 minus y1, negative 7. When you have a double negative, remember that turns to a positive, so it's negative 7 plus 4, negative 8 minus 4. This is AB. Negative 7 plus 4 is negative 3, negative 8 minus 4 is negative 12, and negative 3 over negative 12 simplifies down to 1/4. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to find the slope of CD. Label x1, y1, x2, y2. So on the top, it's going to be negative 5 minus 7, and then negative 2 minus 1. And we end up getting negative 5 minus 7 is negative 12, negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3, which reduces down to positive 4. That slope. And there's the first slope. We have to decide whether they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither. If we look, they're not parallel because they're not exactly the same. One's 1/4, one's 4. Not parallel. Now we have to decide if they're perpendicular. Well, I like to look at their signs first. The first slope's positive, the second slope positive. They're not perpendicular because remember, to be perpendicular, they have to be opposite signs. These are the same sides. So yes, they are flipped versions of each other. If you flipped 1/4, you end up getting 4. but they're not opposite signs. They have to fit both criteria. So it's neither. They're not parallel, they're not perpendicular, they're just normal everyday lines. Okay? We look at the next section, we're going to use a lot of slope-intercept form. And you generally use this when you have the slope and the y-intercept. We're going to use it no matter what, because you're not going to be given these equations, so the less you have to remember, the better. So just remember y equals mx plus b and you'll be fine. Point slope is what you talked about in Algebra 1. You use this when you have the slope and a point or just 2 points. We're not going to use it this much because you're not going to be given it. If you were given this formula, we would use it because it's kind of easier, but you're not given it, and the less you have to try to memorize and remember, the better. So we're just going to focus on y equals mx plus b. So if we look at example 1, we want to write equations of lines in the y equals mx plus b form, slope-intercept. And the example 1's easy. It's nice because we were given the slope and we were given the y-intercept. So remember, the slope is the number that goes in front of the x, and the y-intercept is your b. It's just the number that's at the end. So in example 1, the equation of that line in slope-intercept form is just y equals negative 4x plus 1. Okay. Number 2 is going to require a little bit more work. Okay, the first thing you want to do is find the slope. Okay, we were given 2 points. Find the slope, because we need the slope and the y-intercept for slope-intercept form. So label, I don't know what the heck that was. Well, label, this would be x2, this is y2. I don't know why that keeps happening. And then plug into slope form. Y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. 0 minus 9 is negative 9. Negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. Simplify that down to 3 over 2. There's our slope. Okay? Now, we need to find our b. We weren't given the y-intercept, but we can pick one point. I'm going to pick this point. I like to pick the point with the smaller numbers, easier to deal with, and plug the 0 in for the y value. Plug in the slope for the m, and plug the negative 2 in for the x value. And then we're going to solve for b. 3 over 2 times negative 2 gives you 3 plus b. And then all you have to do is move that 3 over. Plus 3, so b equals 3. Now we have our b, we have our m, so we can write it in slope-intercept form. Y equals 3 over 2x plus your b. And there you go. Example 3 is really similar because we want to write an equation of a line in slope-intercept form that contains this point and that upside down t, that means perpendicular to this line. Okay, we already know the slope of this line, of our new line, because remember, if lines are perpendicular, they're opposite signs and flipped versions of each other. So if we start with negative 2, if we flip it, because technically that's negative 2 over 1, becomes 1 over 2. And the signs are opposite. The original slope is negative, our new slope is going to be positive. So it's positive 1/2. Now that we have our slope, we're going to do the same thing we did in the top. Take the point that they gave you, plug 7 in for y, plug in our slope, plug 1 in for b, for x, plus b. 1/2 times 1 is 1/2. Subtract 1/2 on both sides. Cancels. So we end up b equals 7 minus 1/2 is 13 over 2. Keep it as an improper fraction. So our equation of our line is y is equal to our slope, x, plus our b, 13 over 2. And there you go. And last example, I'm going to write equation of the line containing this point, and it's parallel to the line, negative x plus 5. So remember, with parallel lines, their slopes are exactly the same. And technically, there's a 1 in front of that x. So the slope of our new line is going to be negative 1. The process is exactly the same. Take the 0, plug it in for y, plug in our slope, plug in our x value, add b. Remember, it's in y equals mx plus b form. So we took 0, plugged it in for y, 2, plugged it in for x, took our m and plugged it in for m, and we solved for b. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Add 2 to both sides. B ends up equaling 2. So the equation of our line, y equals negative 1 x plus 2. You don't have to write the negative 1. It's more proper if you don't. So you might see it as y is equal to negative x plus 2. They're the same thing. Whether you want to write the 1 or not, it doesn't matter. Same exact equation. And there you go.